Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the grand sitting room of the Abbott mansion, usually so redolent of old money and older traditions, had grown thick and heavy, charged with a silence that was less an absence of sound and more a physical presence. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. A pregnant pause in which the very molecules of the atmosphere seemed to brace for impact. Claire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to still their faint trembling, sat perched on the edge of a velvet settee, her gaze fixed on Kyle Abbott, who stood before the cold, empty fireplace like a prosecutor preparing his closing argument. Her heart, a frantic bird against the cage of her ribs, had not stilled since his urgent summons. There was a grim purpose in his eyes, a resolve that bypassed his usual corporate charm, and it sent a cold dread seeping into her bones. She had known on some instinctual level that this moment was inevitable, that the beautiful fragile house of cards her life had become was destined to collapse. She just never imagined the demolition would be so deliberate, so meticulously orchestrated by someone she had begun to consider a friend, an ally in the complex tapestry of the Abbott and Newman feud. Kyle's face was a mask of conflicted duty, his jaw set, but the faint lines of regret around his eyes suggested this was a task he found distasteful, yet one he deemed absolutely necessary. Kyle began not with an accusation, but with a statement of fact, his voice low and steady, each word chosen with a lawyer's precision. "Claire," he started, holding her gaze, "I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you comes from a place of profound concern. For you, for our family's stability, and for the truth that has been deliberately hidden from you." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced his smartphone, its sleek dark surface looking like a slab of obsidian in his hand. It was a mundane object, yet in that moment it felt more menacing than any weapon. Holden has not been the man you believe him to be. The business trips, the late nights at the office, the sudden unreachable silences, they were not what they seemed. A bitter hollow laugh escaped Claire's lips before she could stop it, a defense mechanism against the wave of nausea rising in her throat. It was the same laugh she used at society galas when faced with a subtle insult, a way of dismissing a threat without engaging. But here in this intimate, terrifying setting, it sounded frail and desperate, even to her own ears. The first image flashed onto the screen, and Kyle turned it slowly for her to see. It was a photograph taken from across a restaurant, the lighting dim and intimate, but the faces were unmistakably clear. There was Holden, her Holden, the man who had sworn his love for her just days ago, his hand resting comfortably on the bare arm of a stunning brunette. They were leaning in close, their heads tilted together in a manner that spoke of shared secrets and deep familiarity. It wasn't a casual business dinner. It was a scene of romance, of intimacy. Claire's breath hitched, her mind scrambling to find an explanation, any plausible reason that could strip this image of its damning narrative. A client, perhaps? A distant cousin? But the body language was a language all its own, and it screamed of an affair. She could see the smile on Holden's face, a relaxed, unguarded expression she hadn't seen in months, a smile he reserved for private moments that she had foolishly believed were hers alone. The woman was beautiful, young. Her eyes locked on his with a look of adoration that was a mirror of what Claire once felt. Before she could form a coherent protest, Kyle's thumb swiped, and a second picture materialized. This one was taken outside the same restaurant, under the soft glow of a street lamp. Holden had his arm around the woman's waist, pulling her close, his face buried in her hair as they shared a laugh against the cool night air. The casual intimacy of the gesture was a physical blow to Claire's solar plexus. She could almost hear the sound of that laugh, a sound that should have been hers to share. The details, captured with the cruel clarity of a modern camera lens, were excruciating. The way his fingers splayed against the small of her back, the familiar wool of his coat, the one she had bought for him last Christmas, the simple, terrifying fact that this was not a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. This was a relationship. Kyle said nothing, allowing the visual evidence to speak its own brutal truth, his silence more powerful than any rant or accusation could ever be. The third picture was the one that truly broke the fragile remains of her composure. It was a selfie, seemingly taken by the woman herself, her face taking up most of the frame as she grinned playfully at the camera. But in the background, slightly blurred but perfectly recognizable, was Holden, shirtless, lying in a rumpled hotel bed, his arm thrown over his eyes as if sleeping peacefully. A hotel room. The final, undeniable confirmation. The sterile, anonymous decor of the room behind them spoke of transient encounters and secrets kept far from the sanctity of home. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. This was no longer just a dinner. This was the morning after. This was a shared space, a shared bed. A level of betrayal so profound it felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. The carefully constructed walls of denial she had been building crumbled to dust, and the raw, searing pain of the truth rushed in to take its place. Kyle continued his silent, damning presentation. Another swipe, another image. Holden and the woman at a charity gala. One Claire had been unable to attend due to a migraine. They were dancing, his hand resting possessively on her hip, her head on his shoulder as if it belonged there. Swipe. A picture from what looked like a company picnic, but Holden was playing volleyball, and the woman was on his team, cheering him on, her hand on his arm in a gesture of easy camaraderie. Swipe. A screenshot of a text message thread, the contact name saved as @, with messages that were innocuous on the surface but laden with subtext upon closer inspection. Miss you. Can't wait for Thursday. Last night was perfect. Each new piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of her marriage, another layer of the elaborate fiction Holden had been living. Kyle had not just one blurry photo. He had a dossier. He had a timeline. He had proof of a sustained, hidden life that ran parallel to the one he presented to her. A life filled with laughter, intimacy, and another woman. The room began to swim, the opulent furnishings blurring into a nauseating swirl of color. Claire could hear the blood roaring in her ears, a deafening tide of humiliation and heartbreak. She thought of all the times Holden had been distant, the excuses that had seemed so reasonable at the time, the extra workload at the office, the stress of a new merger, the need to travel to secure a client. She had believed him. She had offered sympathy, support, a quiet home to return to. She had defended him to her family, to their friends, dismissing their concerned looks and subtle hints as mere gossip or jealousy. All the while, he had been weaving this intricate web of deceit, using her trust as the primary thread. The weight of her own gullibility was a crushing burden. How could she have been so blind? How could she have not seen the signs that now, in hindsight, seemed so glaringly obvious? The new cologne, the increased attention to his gym routine, the phone he now kept password protected and face down, the business trips from which he returned smelling of a hotel's generic soap instead of the city he claimed to have visited. Kyle finally lowered the phone, his task complete. The digital gallery of her humiliation was over, but the images were now burned permanently onto the back of her eyelids. He's been seeing her for at least 6 months, Claire, Kyle said, his voice softer now, laced with a genuine pity that was almost worse than his earlier resolve. It's not a fling. It's an affair. I have credit card receipts, hotel bookings, witness statements from a private investigator. I couldn't let you live this lie any longer. You deserve to know the truth. The words private investigator landed with a particular thud. This wasn't a lucky discovery or a stumbled-upon secret. This was a calculated, funded operation to unearth the full extent of her husband's betrayal. Kyle had gone to war to find this truth, and he had won, leaving her standing in the rubble of her life. She felt a bizarre, fleeting sense of gratitude towards him, quickly drowned out by a torrent of white-hot rage directed at the absent Holden. Tears, hot and shameful, finally began to stream down Claire's face, but they were not tears of sadness alone. They were tears of fury, of a profound and utter violation. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, had shared her bed, her dreams. Her name was a stranger, a skilled and practiced liar. The memories of their recent life together now felt like scenes from a poorly written play, with Holden delivering his lines flawlessly, while living an entirely different script off stage. The birthday dinner where he'd been distracted, the anniversary trip he'd cut short for a work emergency, the quiet evenings where he'd stare at his phone with a faint smile. It all clicked into a horrifying new picture, a mosaic of betrayal crafted from 1,000 tiny, overlooked moments. She stood up abruptly, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her, and walked to the large bay window, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn of the Abbott estate. The world outside continued with its placid, unchanging beauty, a stark contrast to the cataclysm that had just occurred within the room. She saw her reflection in the glass, a pale, tear-streaked woman looking back from a world that had fundamentally shifted on its axis. The Claire in the reflection was a woman betrayed, a woman whose reality had been exposed as a carefully maintained illusion. She wrapped her arms around herself, a feeble attempt to hold her shattered pieces together. The question was no longer if Holden had lied, but what she was going to do now that the foundation of her existence had been proven to be rotten. The evidence was irrefutable, a digital monument to his infidelity. Kyle had not merely exposed a lie. He had handed her the tools to dismantle her entire life, and the responsibility of what to build from the wreckage now rested solely, terrifyingly, on her shoulders. The silence in the room was different now. The anticipation was gone, replaced by the heavy, solemn quiet of aftermath, a silence that was filled with the ghost of a marriage that had never truly been what she believed it to be, and the daunting, uncertain echo of a future she would now have to face completely alone. The air in Genoa City was tense, heavy with the kind of energy that only came when secrets were about to explode into the open. At Society, the atmosphere shifted the moment Kyle Abbott stepped inside, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable, but his eyes blazing with quiet fury. In his hand was his phone, the device that now held the truth, the undeniable proof that Holden Mays had been lying not only to Claire Grace, but to everyone who believed he was a changed man. The hum of quiet conversation around the restaurant dimmed as Kyle's presence drew attention. People could sense something was coming, something messy, emotional and irreversible. And they weren't wrong. Kyle didn't usually involve himself in Claire's personal life. He respected her, especially after how hard she had fought to rebuild her life and repair her relationship with the Newmans. She was young but had endured more than most, and Kyle admired her resilience. But when he saw Holden 2 nights ago at the Grand Phoenix, his arm around another woman laughing, kissing her like a man without a care in the world, Kyle had felt a mix of disgust and pity. He knew Claire didn't deserve to be played like that. And he also knew Holden had been charming everyone lately, pretending to be devoted, loyal, even talking about proposing to Claire someday. That made the betrayal worse. Kyle had thought long and hard before deciding what to do. He didn't want to hurt Claire, but he couldn't let her continue believing in a man who was lying straight to her face. So, he did what few people in Genoa City ever dared to do. He decided to expose the truth no matter the consequences. He had snapped several clear photos that night, Holden with his arm around a brunette at the bar, kissing her cheek, whispering in her ear, then later leaving the hotel with her. Each image told a story of deceit, and each one made Kyle's blood boil a little more. He didn't know who the woman was, but that didn't matter. The pictures said enough. Claire arrived at Society shortly after, her face lighting up when she saw Kyle. She thought he had called her there to talk about something work-related or maybe about Harrison, who she adored. But that light began to dim the moment she saw his serious expression. She stopped mid-step, a wave of uncertainty washing over her. Kyle didn't even need to say much at first. His demeanor said it all. "Kyle, what's wrong?" she asked softly, moving closer. The restaurant had gone quieter now. A few heads turned, people sensing that something significant was unfolding. Kyle's voice was calm, almost too calm, when he finally spoke. "I need to show you something, Claire. And before I do, I want you to know I'm not doing this to hurt you." Claire frowned, confused, her hands tightening around her purse strap. "You're scaring me. What is it?" she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment before unlocking his phone and turning the screen toward her. The first picture appeared, Holden at the bar, his hand wrapped tightly around another woman's waist. Claire blinked, thinking maybe her eyes were deceiving her. "No, that can't be," she murmured, her voice trembling. But Kyle swiped again, showing another picture, then another. Each one destroyed another piece of her trust. Her lips parted as she stared at the final image, Holden kissing the woman outside the hotel entrance. Claire's body went rigid, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't think. The entire restaurant seemed to vanish around her. It was just her, the phone, and the undeniable truth that her boyfriend had betrayed her. Kyle didn't say a word, just waited, giving her space to process. She finally exhaled shakily, shaking her head in disbelief. This isn't real. There has to be an explanation," she said, her voice breaking. Kyle's tone softened. I wanted to believe that too, Claire. But I saw it myself. He wasn't just having dinner with her. They looked intimate, comfortable. Tears welled up in her eyes as she turned away, trying to steady herself. Claire had worked so hard to find stability again after years of manipulation, pain, and distrust. She thought Holden was different. Someone who accepted her despite her past, who made her feel like she was finally moving on from the darkness. And now, just like that, the illusion shattered. I asked him last night if he was hiding something, she whispered, her voice trembling. He laughed. He told me I was being paranoid. God, how could I be so stupid? Her voice cracked and she pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. Kyle instinctively stepped forward, wanting to comfort her, but he hesitated. Claire needed truth, not pity. You're not stupid, he said quietly. He's a liar, Claire. And he's good at it. Don't blame yourself for believing someone who worked hard to fool you. She looked up at him, her face pale but fierce now, her pain slowly transforming into anger. Where is he? She asked, her tone sharper. Where is Holden right now? Kyle didn't have to answer, because as fate would have it, Holden himself walked into society at that very moment. The timing couldn't have been crueler. Holden strolled in casually, his usual confident grin plastered on his face. The grin faltered the moment he saw Claire's tear-streaked face and Kyle standing beside her, phone still in hand. His eyes darted between them, his posture stiffening as realization began to dawn. Claire, he started, forcing a nervous smile. What's going on? The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Claire's eyes blazed with fury and heartbreak as she stepped toward him, her hands trembling but her voice sharp as a blade. You tell me, Holden. Why don't you explain these? She snatched the phone from Kyle and thrust it toward him, the pictures glaring back under the restaurant's soft lighting. Holden froze, color draining from his face as he recognized the images. He tried to play it off, to lie his way out, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Claire, it's not what it looks like, he said quickly, his voice rising slightly. She's just a friend, someone from out of town. Don't you dare, Claire snapped, her voice echoing across the restaurant. Don't you dare lie to me again. You're kissing her in front of the hotel, Holden. You called me that night and told me you were working late. You looked me in the eye and said you loved me. Was that all part of your game? Holden's mouth opened but no words came. Kyle stood silently behind her, arms crossed, ready if Holden tried to twist the truth again. Claire's anger burned hotter with every second. You let me believe in you. You made me defend you when everyone told me to be careful, that you weren't as perfect as you pretended to be. I told them they were wrong. Her voice cracked, the vulnerability cutting through her rage. I believed you because I thought I finally found someone who saw me for who I really am. Not the broken girl everyone remembers. But you were just another liar. Holden tried to step closer, but Kyle moved slightly, his stance protective. You should leave, Holden, he said lowly. You've done enough damage.